So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the, or welcome back actually, for the next installment of this Market Matters series. It's been a fantastic couple of weeks here in Atlanta as far as weather goes, and I hope you've all enjoyed a similar condition. For today's Market Matters, we're shifting the content mix a little bit and are able to bring you another great pair of experts from Charles Schwab. Only this time, we'll be diving into the world of cybersecurity. We thought this topic would resonate with many different clients and potential clients, given its renewed importance now that we're all likely spending a lot more time working from home or home offices. I'll touch more on their bios when we get to that section in just a minute. As you all may know by now, I'm a big believer in bringing other voices to the conversation, so we think we are hitting the mark with our with this special topic today. And from an expectations perspective, we're expecting that Market Matters will run a little longer than the normal 30-minute format, probably closer to 45. And again, thanks for joining us today. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. We're going to place everyone on mute. This is so we don't get any accidental background noise during the conversation. As in prior webcasts, please submit all questions that you might have through the chat feature of Zoom. I'll try to incorporate those questions as we go through some of the content and the topic, but this conversation particularly, I think, given the format of it, will help with, if you guys submit questions that come top of mind, Adam and Paige would really like to attack those as they come through. So turning to the agenda today, as in previous Market Matters episodes, we're going to cover some COVID-19 updates and just some of our more recent thoughts about how that situation is evolving. We'll talk a little bit about the economic and investment updates, because certainly I think that's top of mind for a lot of folks right now, given where the markets are at, and then we'll dive into the fireside chat with some Q&A towards the end. So with that, let's get started. So this should be a familiar looking chart. This is from Bloomberg. It's a great data series updated every day that shows global number of new cases added per day. And, as you might expect with increased number of tests being administered, I mean, the US is actually administering about 500,000 tests a day, which actually was the Trump administration's target level of testing on a go-forward basis. We're achieving that right now. And as you might imagine, with more testing becomes more awareness of infection. And you can see kind of how that trend has evolved over time, not only globally, kind of ramped up a little bit as testing kits have become more available, but also, in the US, it looks like it's turning up a little bit. We'll be watching the data series pretty closely to see how this evolves over time, but other areas like Brazil, Russia, even Iran for that matter, hard to decipher exactly if this is due to increased testing in other countries or a real problem. But I guess the net of it is that it does appear a lot of global politicians are starting to lose some conviction in the economic shutdown, and for good reason, reopening for various reasons, but primarily for economic ones. Turning to the US situation here real quick, you can see reopening is having an impact. And primarily in the areas you would expect it to have. Obviously, dense population centers more so than others. State by state reopenings are inviting additional people to mingle or go out and spend monies or on retail sales. But incoming data would suggest that we're starting to see some pretty significant rises in infection rates in the Sun Belt, which is beach destinations for a lot of us at this time of year. So but the key is, as Larry Kudlow pointed out over the weekend, it's not so much the number of positive results that we're getting, it's more the hospitalization and mortality rates. So we're definitely, and the good news is on that front is that those are remaining pretty stable, even though infection rates are rising. So that means that containment measures, at least right now, are working in those areas that we thought they would. Turning to the economic and investment updates briefly before we turn it over to Paige and Adam. You can see this is a new slide. People had suggested that we put in just to give you an idea of what we're thinking from an investment standpoint. You can see We've recently downgraded U.S. large company stocks from, I'd say more attractive to neutral rating, and municipal bonds from an active rating down to neutral. This is all valuation driven. This has nothing to do with, I guess the 5 to 10 year forward looking potential for either of those asset categories. But, really this is just a valuation argument, and that's really a function of the fact that earnings are recovering slower than the market is recovering. It's primarily because, a market is a discounting mechanism and it's forward looking. Just some general comments on the portfolio. As you may know, I call this actively managing risks, because now we're at a level in the S&P around 3,100 that seemed unattainable only 6 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago. So what are we doing? After our rebalance, we continue to add to our cash proxy or placeholder through ultra short bond ETFs, so that we'll have that to draw on when the market invariably decides to move sharply lower for one reason or another. On the equity side, as I was mentioning earlier, gains will likely be harder from here as valuations are a bit more challenged than they were 6 weeks ago. And just by way of reference, you've got the forward-looking PE ratio on the S&P is at around 22 times. The average for the forward-looking PE ratio in the S&P is somewhere in between 17 and 18. So that just might help frame the valuation argument. But I would say, I keep going back to this because it's really important, and one reason why our equity portfolios are having a great year this year. And that is active management is really demonstrating performance potential, because there is a significant amount of dispersion between what's working this year and what's really not working this year. So if you can be in the areas where there are attractive opportunities, or the market sees attractive opportunities, and avoiding areas that are not experiencing earnings growth or are just structurally challenged, like energy potentially, then you run the risk of performing pretty good, doing pretty well in that segment. On the fixed income side, you see here, I just call it, we're getting back to silly levels in certain areas of the bond market. That has a lot to do with what the Fed is doing currently. And the next step I think we shall be looking for would be just what the Bank of Japan is doing, so we're actually using the Bank of Japan playbook right now to think about how we should be, or how the Fed should be thinking about interest rates right now. And one of those things that we're expecting to come, it would be yield curve control. And basically what that means is similar to what the Fed did during World War II. They said, okay, for every 10-year bond, the max interest rate that position can ever have would be 1%, more or less, or whatever that rate is. Or for the 30-year bond, those bonds will never yield more than 2% in the marketplace, and they'll be buying every time the yield pokes up above those levels. So that's what we're looking for next. But I would say we are continuing to increase the higher quality portion of our portfolio. And this has to do with a lot of around where we see inflation heading in the intermediate term, which is probably lower. I mean, we're probably going to get an inflation print over the summertime. Don't be surprised if you see a negative inflation rate, primarily due to energy, but also a number of other reasons. And then finally, just on the alternative side, that our frequent Market Matters listeners might know that we are big believers in alternative assets or strategies, and we have those capabilities in-house. So we're actually in the market right now raising capital for our third private market opportunity vehicle. We think there's a lot of opportunities out there right now. And we're also adding, because the volatility index in the S&P has come down so much, we're adding to volatility capturing strategies that can really benefit when the market decides to turn lower. And here is what I was talking about from a stock perspective, real briefly. As S&P, you can see actually briefly went positive for the year. Now it's probably in this plus -3 to -4 range. But just some trends that have been in place, that continue to be in place. U.S. large companies outperforming small and international, broadly speaking. And we think that's a dynamic likely to maintain, but it's subtly starting to shift. Our views are starting to shift a little bit, because the U.S. dollar is starting to decline a little bit versus other currencies, and that helps us formulate a timing or an indication that we might start looking at international positions more closely in the near future. Growth versus value. You may recall that we had talked about this a few weeks ago, as that might be potentially shifting. Well, we're right back to those levels where growth continues to really outperform value in a market way. In the most recent sell-off, the sell-off in value stocks was much more visceral than on the growth side. So it does appear that growth is still quite in favor by the investing community. And then moving to fixed income, I just said here we're back at silly levels, and silly basically means that it's a direct result of what the Fed has been announcing and continues to announce. They're getting much more creative with their bond buying programs. The most recent action they indicated was they'd be buying direct corporate bonds, either in the primary market, which means issued directly to the Fed, or on the secondary market, where the Fed is actually going out and buying bonds from asset managers or like us or individuals in select areas. So that's really what's lighting a fire under the investment grade index here. But notice that some of the junkier parts of the market, the high yield market and the emerging market bond market, are continuing to recover a little bit. We still don't like these just from a valuation standpoint, but it's just an interesting note to keep track of. And then finally, I would note that, and one reason why we think markets will probably trade sideways for the foreseeable future, not with like great conviction, but with, I'd say better than 50% conviction, is that market indicators are starting to show some pretty interesting data points. One is this, both of these came from Schwab, by the way, Liz Ann Saunders. But a few things are happening here. One is that day traders, you can see Google search trends for not only day trading, but also call options, with everyone working from home or temporarily, some folks temporarily out of work. And sports betting, of course, shut down because sports aren't going on right now. A lot of, I think, the move from 2,900 to where we are today has to do with new participants in the market, younger investors getting active in the stock market at almost precisely the wrong time, unfortunately. And then the CBOE put call index, this just measures puts and calls are options. And if you're buying a put, you're buying protection on the downside. If you're buying a call, you're buying kind of a speculative upside bet. And when those two get skewed to the upside, meaning people are buying more calls than puts, that just means that there's a little bit of a speculative flavor in the air that we should all be paying attention to right now. So just to sum it up real quick before we turn it over to our main event, some key takeaways here. We're definitely seeing resistance in the market at around 3,100 on the S&P. That's about 22 times earnings for the S&P, and I think from a valuation standpoint, that just makes sense. Who knows? I mean, we could overshoot. That would be great. We would just get more cautious, probably give us another opportunity to rebalance if that were to happen. Retesting of the March 2020 low is getting less probable, but it's still not out of the realm of possibility. So that probability has gone down, certainly, as economic data is suggesting a brighter future. But there's a number of things that could throw this back into the lurch. I mean, just today, one of the events that I've been keeping an eye on, because it's not been in the news for a long time, has been the border dispute between China and India. If you all don't know what's going on there, it's a really interesting situation. There's a part of the Himalayan border that has been contested for the better part of the last 50 years. 20 Indian soldiers died in a border skirmish today, and we'll see where that actually leads. But those are the types of events that we've got to be aware of that could rise up. Building up portfolio resilience, I think, is really key because of these unforeseen risks, and we're continuing to watch this growth versus value rotation pretty carefully because turning points are always very difficult to forecast. So with that, I've given the first 15 minutes a bit of a market update here, and we're going to reserve the bulk of the time for this discussion today for what we're calling a fireside chat with two cybersecurity experts that have welcome, have joined us today on the call to lend some of their insights. And you can see them up on the screen here. We have Adam Moseley and Paige Adlington. So Adam Moseley, just by way of reference, he's a managing director of technology, operations and cybersecurity consulting for Charles Schwab. He consults with advisors and is responsible for the general management, leadership and development of Schwab's technology consulting team that help RAs in a variety of capacities. And then Paige Adlington, she's a senior consultant for Schwab. And as a member of Schwab's technology consulting team, Paige provides hands-on guidance and consulting support to help investment advisors in a number of different areas, from growth initiatives to efficiency, profitability, and also, of course, cybersecurity. So with that, Paige and Adam, thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just as a brief reminder to all those that are on the call today, we would really like to know what's on your mind as far as questions around cybersecurity and identity theft, things of that nature. So please feel free to, layer in or lob over questions through the chat feature that might be on your mind. So this is kind of an opportunity to pick the brain of some experts in those categories. I mean, I know personally myself, not only me, but my dad and I have both been, maybe it's because it's the Jones last name or something. And there are actually like 20 Todd Joneses in the Atlanta area by themselves. But this is a topic that's close to home for me and my father, just because we've had probably our credit card number stolen probably multiple times. My dad's had, loans taken out, in his name a number of times too. So I think a lot of these topics certainly would resonate. So anyway, let's talk about, I think let's kick it off maybe with one of the more pressing issues, and that is around email security, because that really is, Adam, if I'm not mistaken, probably the nexus around which a lot of cybercrime is perpetuated. So maybe you could give us a brief lay of the land on what is going on around email, phishing scandals or things of that nature, and then what are some of the best practices to mitigate some of those risks that arise from email?
Absolutely, Todd. And first, a big thank you to you and your team, and to the, by the looks of it, several dozen clients on the line here. I've got 72, and that's just the individual registrants. So I appreciate the time. I appreciate the interest in this particular topic. So we know that this is a topic that is overwhelming. We know it's a topic that is concerning to all, and you really appreciate the time and attention to those who made the choice to join today. So I would tell you, Todd, you and your clients on the line, our objectives today are really straightforward, not to scare anyone, but rather to equip everyone. I hope that those on the line today ask some really good questions. We are very excited to take those questions and see where the conversation goes. But I hope, and actually I fully expect everyone on the line today to leave with something, at least one thing, and potentially many more best practices, things that could be implemented very quickly, very inexpensively, that make everyone's situation a little more secure there. So don't be shy with the questions, and look forward to addressing those. And Todd, I appreciate where you took us, first and foremost, with respect to email. And I think there's a really good reason we're starting, with the topic of email. So I talk about email as cyber public enemy number one, and potentially the greatest cybersecurity risk that each and every one of us faces. And that's because the vast majority, and I'm talking about most, if not all, cybersecurity threats that we see start with email. It's a simple inbound email into our inboxes, and most often they'll contain a link or a malicious attachment. And the issue is that we've all become incredibly trusting of email, and we tend not to hesitate to click on a link or open an attachment. And the fraudsters, as we call them, they know this, and they will put malicious links or malicious attachments in those emails. And when we click on those, it may infect our computers or take us out to a website where we may be asked to give up really sensitive information that gives these fraudsters access to our online account. So one of the things we like to talk about is to be very careful with email. And I'm going to say something that is actually a little bit polarizing, and that many have said is actually quite extreme, but I would challenge everyone here on the line to think of everything that's in their inbox as guilty until they prove that it's innocent. And again, while that might sound a bit extreme, if I can create just a moment of hesitation the next time you look at an email in your inbox, that might be just enough time for your instinct to kick in, and for which is, by the way, your most powerful cybersecurity tool at your disposal. That is, in fact, your instinct, and give you just enough time to think twice, about that, and know that the fraudsters are preying upon that, and it is one of the most common threats that we see. So be particularly careful of clicking on links, clicking on attachments, even the little ones at the bottom, by the way, that say unsubscribe. We hear this all the time, that folks will be very good about clicking on unsubscribe, and most of the time that's okay, but you should know that the fraudsters, they know that we do that too, and sometimes they'll put a link at the bottom of a malicious email. When you click on that link to unsubscribe, it may advance you out to a website where you're asked to give up even more information that could be sensitive in nature, or it might identify you as a target, and then they will continue to send emails inbound to your inboxes. So rather than clicking on that unsubscribe link, we would advise you to move it into your junk folder, or move that email into your spam folder. And then your email platform, no matter which one it is actually, is going to be smart enough to move every email from that sender to that spam or junk folder going forward, or even emails that might look very similar to that. And that's just a great way to stay on top of those. And then maybe once a week you clear out that spam or junk folder, and you're in the clear. So just some best practices to be thinking about over email. But again, understand very clearly that most threats we see, they come by way of email these days.
I'd like to add on to Adam's, extra precaution in that I pretty much communicate to folks, to advisors, to my own family and friends. I'm like, you need to assume with email that somebody's reading it as well. When you think about the information that you potentially share via email, you need to think about the security and exactly what you're sharing, because you can go to that same pause and think, is what I'm writing something that what I would want anybody or somebody I didn't know to read? And that's an additional way to think about it, that it's could be a very public communication as well.
Such a great point, Paige. Todd, I imagine at Gratus Capital, you guys have some sort of portal or something that you prefer your clients use when they exchange sensitive information with you. And that's a much better route to take when communicating that sensitive information, rather than using plain and clear email for that.
Yeah, absolutely. We've gone away from sending out PDF versions of our any document that might come across, and localized it all within a personalized vault. So yeah, I think that's certainly a best practice that we've tried to adopt. It may be one related, Adam and Paige, that someone just sent in that I think is really interesting. I've wondered the same thing. Relating to the unsubscribe button, I know that can be kind of a sneaky way to get someone to click on it. I know, honestly, I've done that over the years. I've been guilty of clicking on that thing, a number of times. So how would you address, getting off of a distribution list, but also by maybe not clicking the unsubscribe button, if that makes sense? Yeah,
you got it. No, thank you. It's the next level, next layer to that very comment that we made. So moving the email to your spam or junk folder will clear it out of your inbox. So that's a great way to, in a way, unsubscribe without actually unsubscribing. And then, maybe it's once every few days, you just empty out that junk folder, that spam folder. If you really wanted to unsubscribe, though, the best way to do it is to shut down that email, open up a browser, go to that provider's website. Now, you might need to log in to do this, but then go to it's usually on their marketing tab or communications tab, and unsubscribe from there. Right. So what we're really trying to avoid is clicking on a link. And this is actually a great and rather standard practice. If you could avoid clicking on a link that's directing you to really any website, and rather get into the habit of closing down the email, opening up a browser window, and then typing in the address of that provider and accessing the platforms that way. That's a great way to keep from falling victim to what may in fact be at times malicious links out to malicious websites or other destinations.
Got it.
Yep.
So here's been a couple more that have come in around this topic. So can an email simply residing in the junk or spam folder be harmful, or does it need to be open to activate? So it sounds like from what you just said, if it's in the junk folder, it's pretty much taken care of, isolated, quarantine, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, Paige, let me take this one here. It's a very common question. No, an email residing in your inbox, residing in junk on its own is not going to cause harm. Even opening that email, that's not what's going to activate any sort of malicious software or cause harm. It's actually the clicking on a link or the opening of an attachment that could then infect the computer with a virus. So simply looking at it, and the same is true, by the way, you're going to have many users on the line that will get links by way of text messages on their iPhones. This is a type of scheme that's known as smishing or SMS-based phishing. Same thing there. Opening up the text is not going to cause a problem at all. It's the clicking on that link. So that's the takeaway. Is just try to avoid that when you can.
Got it.
And we did see, I just was going to share that we did see an increase in both of these types of activities, especially around texting during the COVID, during this time, specifically around charitable giving, not Schwab's charitable giving, but charitable giving in general. And so I'm just always advising and cautioning people that there's nothing wrong with ignoring an outreach for charitable giving or somebody that's trying to do the right thing and going to a legitimate website. Once again, just taking yourself out of that potential outreach that's compromised or is from a fraudster. Got it.
Thanks for that. And a couple more on email here, if you guys are okay, stay on that topic.
Mm-hmm.
So a question from Fred, thanks Fred, is do you recommend end-to-end encrypted email, or are there modifications to that you can make to a Yahoo or a Gmail or whatever to make it more secure? I don't know if you're all aware of that. I'm just, spitballing here a little bit.
Yeah, and it may be, Todd, that our two organizations use encrypted email between one another. We've established that with various businesses and organizations. Yes, we are advocates of that, but it's complicated. It requires users on both sides to have that same type of encryption, to have enabled that same type of encryption, and furthermore to enforce that encryption. So I am a much bigger advocate of, if there's a need to exchange sensitive information between two parties, to use some sort of portal to do that, like what you use, Todd, with your clients on the line. Personally, when I need to exchange information sensitive in nature with an attorney, with an accountant, I use platforms like Dropbox or iCloud or even ShareFile. There's many different varieties of them out there, and these have great controls built into them. They have various types of security capabilities and measures built into them, and also it keeps the information out of email. Now, Paige made a really important point about you need to think of anything that's communicated in email as almost like a postcard. We talk about it as it's a postcard. It means I can look at it over one shoulder when they're writing it, when it makes its way through the postal system, you can see it, and when it sits in somebody's mailbox, you can view it there. The same is really true of email. So it's just best to avoid email altogether when communicating matters that are sensitive in nature. Use a portal of some sort instead.
Got it.
And don't forget the old-fashioned phone.
Yeah.
We tend to stop. we tend to not use those things we carry around as phones anymore. So it is possible just to pick up a phone and ask the question, or and know the person that you're talking to and communicate the information.
Yeah, sure. No, I think for our organization as well too, that's been Zoom, obviously, getting the face-to-face connection, but phone communication's gotten a lot more important recently, given some of these items that have cropped up. One question here from David is that, do we need to have separate protection software on our individual PCs in addition to the Windows Defender that comes with Windows 10? Or, what are kind of some of the best practices or software packages you found that might help in kind of antivirus is what it sounds like, or kind of email defending?
Yeah, Paige, you want to get us started there?
Sure. So the Windows version is great. I will say on a more personal basis, I am still a big fan of going and engaging or finding another perhaps more robust or more controllable piece of antivirus software. Often they're not terribly expensive anymore. I'm able to manage my whole household, so multiple devices. And it just gives me better reporting. It gives me better information. So, for me, and what I communicate and do like to share is, given that option and the availability that you can go and do that, do a little bit of research, find one that gives you more robust protection and maybe some functionality that doesn't exist in the standard version that you would get. And you'd probably feel a little bit better and have more options out there to keep you safe.
Well said. Couldn't agree more. Maybe the one thing I'll add is there's a great website that I often refer folks to. I've been using it for probably close to 20 years. It's the letter C as in Charlie and then net, CNET. It's fabulous for getting advice and reviews on technology and then also computer software, including antivirus systems that are out there.
Right. Great. Well, so there's, I was going to shoot that out. It looks like I just sent it to Nick. Sorry, Nick. What you just mentioned. So a couple, one more item on email before we get to some other questions around VPNs and things of that nature. So is there a way, it's a great question from Fred, is there a way to screen attachments before opening them, especially if they come in from friends? I think we've all been in that situation where someone's email account that gets hacked, and then someone sends out a kind of generic message that maybe they just have a dry sense of humor that day or something. But I guess back to Fred's question, is there a way to preview those attachments, or is it just best practice not even to mess with it?
It gets a little technical, but I'll tell you, with some different platforms, there are some advanced threat protections that, like, Microsoft has them. I think Google may as well, and I would imagine the larger ones do, where they are actually helping scan some of the attachments that are coming through the system. But also, this is, and back to Paige's comment, this is in part why you want to be running and actively running an antivirus system, because those systems themselves can be set up that as you open any file, the very first thing that happens is it runs a scan on that. And perhaps that's something that Windows Defender might catch on its own, but if not, this is where having a backup and leveraging a well-known, well-used, what I like to say, wildly popular and widely adopted antivirus system might catch that, so long as you've kept your antivirus definitions up to date. So, and again, I know I'm getting a little technical here, but installing the antivirus software, it's not enough. You need to stay on top of your security updates. You need to stay on top of your virus definitions. Because this is what lets the software know on your computer of all the new viruses that have come in overnight or whatnot. So you want to make sure that you're keeping those updated.
Sure. Sorry, before we segue off the topic, before I forget it, are there any products that you all find better than others that you could recommend, or is that not something you're comfortable doing?
No, certainly comfortable with it, but there's many that are out there. It's in part, Todd, why I wanted to reference CNET as a great platform out there to see what's popular. Another avenue is, we all have mobile phones and we all have access to app stores. I'm a big fan of looking for some of the technology that's out there that, one, I'm okay paying for it. And number two, I'm looking for something that is adopted by hundreds of thousands of users and that has, 4.5 stars. I mean, I could mention names like Norton, Symantec, Webroot, Sophos. These are all fantastic antivirus systems, but please don't rely on just that alone. Just take a quick look at these. You'd be surprised what a what a Google search does these days in terms of highlighting, again, widely adopted and wildly popular solutions that are really, really good out there.
Great.
And I'll kind of add on that I would tend to stay away from free versions of applications and, you know, those kind of trial periods that are free. In other words, this is the one place where you do want to spend something, or you want to have what I call the licensed version. Oftentimes, one of the benefits of versions that are a subscription-based or have a fee is that there is added security. They do have updates done more often and are more robust than free versions. So this is an area where you don't go out and try to find the best free version.
Got it. Got it. Thank you. Let's move to a new topic, which I know it looks like at least a couple folks have wanted to know about. So thanks, Rob and Bridget, for asking the question. They want to know about using a VPN from your home computer. Is that a good idea? So maybe start with either Paige or Adam. You know, what is a VPN, and is it something that, you know, folks should consider using at their home office? Thanks.
Yeah, Paige, you want to get us started?
Sure. So I'll start by saying, for those in a business environment, I don't have the option of working from home without a VPN. A VPN is a virtual private network. Essentially what you're doing, if you think about Wi-Fi or your network as an avenue for data to be moved, a VPN locks that and creates that avenue of data sharing, going to websites, going to network resources. It makes it secure or more secure. So absolutely, on the business front, for those of you working from home, and if you're not already, probably within your organizations are using a VPN. On a personal basis, I do use a VPN at home, but what I will say is I use a VPN, but I also look to use a very robust password around my network. In other words, when you think about your Wi-Fi or your home networks, the biggest protection you can have about something happening with those is to have a very robust password, not only on your network, but then also on your computer. So that segues us a little bit, but I do use a VPN at home. Maybe that's because I do love cybersecurity, but once again, without that VPN, I really think your first defense is to think about making your network secure via an extremely robust password on that network, and also a very robust password on your computer. And those are actually much more advantageous avenues of protecting yourself at home.
Great. And where a VPN is extremely important is when you're away from home. It's one of the reasons I like using it at home, because it starts to develop a habit and a behavior to use it elsewhere, because that's where the risk truly is. So when we sit at a Starbucks or Panera or a hotel or you name it, and we're on public Wi-Fi, which, by the way, we generally recommend against using public Wi-Fi, but that's where a VPN is extremely important. It's actually critical, because in those environments, what we're protecting against is a hacker in the traditional sense, looking at everything that's happening on that public Wi-Fi network and tapping into it, and then downloading and storing and stealing that information. And also too, sometimes fraudsters or hackers, they can create their own wireless networks and make them look like Starbucks or Panera or Hilton or you name it. And if you're on it, the chance exists for them to see everything that you're doing on there. So if you have to be on a public Wi-Fi, you absolutely use a VPN, but even better, if you can just up your data plan and use your cellular data. And by the way, all of us running around with iPhones or Android devices, all of those could be set up as hotspots using our cellular data, and that's the better path to go than using a public Wi-Fi. I do my very best not to use public Wi-Fi anywhere, no matter where I'm at.
So it sounds like the net of it is if you're going to use public Wi-Fi, use a VPN. It's kind of what I'm reading into that. If you have to, right?
Yes.
If you got to use it, use a VPN.
That's a great tip. No, thank you. Let's see. There was another question relating to that. Well, again, I guess it gets to encryption on, we've heard about, the importance of encryption on our mobile devices and computers. Can you explain why this is important and how to do it?
Yeah, Paige, let me take this one and you can pile on. So good news here. The technology that I'm going to talk about, it's absolutely free. We're believers of encryption. All of the computer hardware that we use at Schwab, it's encrypted whether we want it to be or not. It's just a standard issue thing for us. And those of you running Windows computers at home, within your security settings, you have access to something called BitLocker, so long as you're using one of the more current versions of the Windows operating system. You should check that box and turn on BitLocker. Those of you using Macs at home, in the security settings on your Mac, you have something known as File Vault. You should check that box and turn it on. All that does is, in the event that computer is lost or stolen, it makes the information that's on that hard drive unusable to anyone. So that's why you want to take advantage, of encryption there. You're ultimately protecting against the loss or theft. And this is now technology that's resident on all of our computers, and all we need to do is enablement. Maybe the next thing I'd suggest, and Paige mentioned this a little bit in one of her previous comments, but while you're inside of those security settings, go ahead and turn on the firewall as well. Windows has one, Mac has one, they're both free. They're part of the native operating system. And what that prevents against is someone trying to come in over the internet and gain access to that computer from the outside. Typically, that would be a hacker or fraudster. Now, I would tell you the chances of this are extremely slim. But again, it's one of the first things I did when I got my Mac computer. I just activated those two features, and the beauty of it is I don't even know that they're running in the background. It makes no difference, no change whatsoever. But it does totally secure my situation there.
Great.
And it's that next level. I mean, when you think about encryption, that importance of devices being mobile, and that is, we have laptops, we are mobile phones, and that is, encryption protects you when you're taking that device around. I mean, I think we all know somebody who has stopped off at the grocery store on the way home from work, left a computer somewhere, and without that level of protection where that device is encrypted, laptop, phone, etc., then somebody can get into that and readily access your data and confidential information. So putting that encryption in place safeguards that device in the event that it was lost or stolen and somebody is able to get their hands on it.
Great.
Yeah, and with mobile devices, Todd, it's even easier with mobile devices. So long as you need a password, a PIN, or your face recognition these days, or a thumbprint rather, to get into the phone, that device is in fact encrypted. Furthermore, I have my iPhone set up such that if someone puts in the password incorrectly 10 times, it will wipe that phone clean and erase everything on it. And the beauty of it is all of my information is stored up in the cloud. I would just need to go get a new iPhone and everything would download, and probably within 10 minutes, I'd be right back up, and running, no problem. But the beauty of that is that I might have lost an iPhone, but all of the information that's on it, everything sensitive to me, is totally secured.
Great. And then, you didn't touch on a few Mac or Apple type product questions. So, there's a few folks that are asking, so do Mac users need protection with software? And would you mind, just running through what those protection measures are?
Yeah, it's a very common question. And, I myself have used Mac computers personally. I just mentioned I'm an iPhone user, and it's a big fan of that platform. And, for some time, it seemed as if it was less important for those of us using Macs to use antivirus software. And the reason for that was there were so many more PCs that are out there running the Windows operating system that was the target. And they were spending, fraudsters, hackers were spending less time targeting Macs. That's actually a misconception. And I believe it is important for those running Macs to use an antivirus software. Again, here too, the first place I would go is out to the Mac App Store and see what's out there. I've run Sophos, I've run WebRoot. Those are two really good antivirus applications. The cable provider that I use, they make Symantec available to me for free. And those are all great platforms. And again, so long as you keep them updated, you're in good shape. But I would not want your clients to rely on my recommendation or the 3 that I mentioned alone. Just take a peek. That's out there. Ask around a little bit. I'm a huge fan too of the Genius Bar. When our Apple stores reopen across the country, those ladies and gentlemen are great at answering questions and seem to enjoy doing it.
Awesome. So I think we got time for maybe one more question before we call it a day here. Right. And this comes from Steve. He says, when traveling internationally, say to China, for as some of us do every now and then, how much should be removed from your personal devices? And I think that maybe iPhone or iPad. And it sounds like, based on what you just described, that the encryption features of those, as long as they're turned on, would go a long way to no one ever getting access to that information on those devices, right?
I think
Adam,
that's
do you
true.
Mind do you mind if I comment?
No, go ahead.
Having spent a lot of my career working overseas, specifically in China and Russia and the Ukraine, historically, I was actually blacked out from using my company devices in those countries. As technology progressed, it wasn't so much about you need to take things off those devices, as that you need to be cognizant of having extremely robust passwords. There is no way I would ever sit down in a Starbucks in China and use their Wi-Fi, probably not even with a VPN, and only because it's just a heightened sense of fraudsters and just different things. So you definitely, I feel it's a next level, but it's more about, think about hotspotting, not using public Wi-Fi, protecting your device, having encryption turned on, having extremely robust passwords. Those are what are going to protect you when you're traveling overseas.
Right. Great. Well, I think that takes us to about the end of our time today. Adam and Paige, you all have been very generous with your time. Thanks so much for joining us on our Market Matters series and some great insights. And I want to thank all clients for joining on the call today. Certainly we'll be back. As you may recall, we're doing now our Market Matters series every 2 weeks now. So the next one will be on June 30th. And I hope you can tune in then, because we'll have a ER doctor from Piedmont Hospital System giving her assessment on what's happening with dynamics in the COVID system, or COVID infections and hospitalization rates. So please tune in. And again, thanks for joining us today. Look forward to seeing you at some point again in the future. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, Adam and Paige.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.